Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a good weekend. Mike is off with his friends again, which is good. He's been working really hard, not only working full-time for a boss, but also working our side business for over 42 years, so deserves a little bit of fun now. So anyway, I'm going to cover this by myself, and I was reading comments under our latest couple of videos, so thank you everyone for your great comments and your emails and your phone calls, and we appreciate your love and support very much. I can't express how thankful we are, for that love and friendship and support. We appreciate it, because we couldn't keep doing this, without your help. Oh boy, I've got a lot to cover, so this may be kind of long. Guess what it's about? Oh yeah. And I want to thank so many of you who have been sending me links and information and your research and quotes from articles and quotes from other books. I am just overwhelmed and so thankful, and I'm sorry if I've missed anyone, and I'm not going to mention any names, but you all know who you are. So thank you for sending me all this information, and I've been working on it myself. Talk about a deep hole. My goodness, there's so much. Now, normally Mike and I, have a rule now that we don't support anyone's books. But since these are older books with some very good information in it, right up there with Crisis of Conscience. Now, for those of you who do not know, Crisis of Conscience is available in hard copy and digital copy, and I'm going to put the link down below. I tried contacting Deborah Dykstra to ask her if she was going to get In Search of Christian Freedom out, and I know she has the copyright to Gentile Times Reconsidered, and I was going to ask her, because I know she has a lot of hard copies in her garage of that, and I haven't heard from her, so I hope she's okay and hasn't gotten sick with COVID. It's difficult to even kind of figure out where to begin. I tried writing an outline, and I've got notes everywhere, but the thing is if you look, there's two different names to this article. Very similar. This one was Pastor Russell's prophecy 25 years ago. I also came across one called Millennial Dawners 25-Year Prophecy. And then, of course, End of All Kingdoms in 1914. Now think about that title for a minute. End of All Kingdoms in 1914. And like I've mentioned before, we've touched on this many times, that Russell and the Bible students believed the end was coming in 1914. In fact, in the 1884 Watchtower, I did a video, probably a couple of months ago, where I read that 1914 is not the date for the beginning, but the end. So Russell was saying that all governments were going to be destroyed and Armageddon was coming in 1914. Well, that's exactly what he was saying. But see, Watchtower, the governing body, when Anthony Morris held up, this newspaper, he wasn't being entirely honest. None of them are being entirely honest. So along those lines, I've got, like I said, a lot of information here. And I want to go to the 2007 book, Captives of a Concept by Don Cameron. And it's a very good book. I had someone send it to me. And I didn't quite get to chapter 12. But I want to thank JPL for sending me this email and telling me that chapter 12 is covering this article. And this Don Cameron makes some good points. The governing body knows what it means to be honest, as can be seen from the way they define the word. To be honest means to be truthful, ... Honesty requires you to be straightforward, not deceptive or misleading. Reasonably, only truthful men qualify to represent God. That's their own quote. So, governing body, if you're representing your God, and you say you have to be truthful to be a representative of it, especially if you're claiming to be of the anointed, the sons of God, then you have to be honest. And like this book brings out, this is under chapter 12, what they say is not always what they do. And I don't see a page number here. But it says there's a difference between making a mistake and being honest. For example, Russell made a mistake when he prophesied that God was going to bring an end to all earthly kingdoms by the end of 1914. And so if the men of the governing body were truthful men, they must be straightforward, not deceptive or misleading, and simply acknowledge Russell's false prophecy. But they cannot acknowledge that fact if they plan on keeping their illusionary God's organization going. Because see, when you lose Russell as a false prophet, well, then you lose the whole 1914 thing, and then you lose the fact, their doctrine, their dogma, that they were chosen by Jesus Christ. You lose all of that. So that is why they cannot admit that. So, like I said, there's a lot of information here, but I have the bond volume. This is the 1973 Awake, and it's the October 8th Awake, and there's an article, Is Mankind at the Crossroads by 1914? Why? Now, what's interesting is they are talking about this article, and they have cherry-picked some quotes from it, making it sound like Russell did prophesy correctly that 1914 was going to be the beginning of the end. Well, we all know that is not true. You can go look it up anywhere, and especially your Watchtower Library. He believed it was the end, Armageddon, the wrath of God, not the beginning, not when Christ was coming in visibly. And I find it interesting that in all these articles I looked at, they show a picture of the article, but the print they have is so small, you can't read it. You can't. So, find this interesting. Okay. Now I have the 1975 yearbook, page 75. The first full paragraph. A typical press reaction of the time appeared in The World, then a leading New York City newspaper. Its Sunday magazine section of August 30th, 1914 contained the article End of All Kingdoms in 1914. There it stated in part, the terrific war outbreak in Europe has fulfilled an extraordinary prophecy. For a quarter of a century past, through preachers and through press, the international Bible students, best known as millennial dawners, have been proclaiming to the world that the day of wrath prophesied in the Bible would dawn in 1914. So, see, even the 1975 yearbook admits that that article was saying that Armageddon, look out for 1914. That Armageddon was going to be in 1914. So going over to page 76, the first paragraph at the top, Reverend Russell is not saying, I told you so, and he is not revising the prophecies to suit the current history. He and his students are content to wait until October, which they figure to be the real end of 1914. True, the Bible students were not taken home to heaven in October 1914, but the 2,520-year-long Gentile times then ended. And as Jehovah's servants later realized more fully, they had plenty of work to do after that time right here on earth in preaching the good news of God's established kingdom. So they even admit Russell made a mistake. So in Don Cameron's book, Captives of a Concept, on page 87, the paragraph at the bottom, it says, in the following example, they not only don't tell Jehovah's Witnesses that Russell's prophecy about 1914 was false, they mislead them to believe that it came true. And then he has a picture of this article, and it says, on page 60 of their Proclaimer's book is a small insert with the heading, Look Out for 1914. It then correctly quotes the August 30th, 1914 issue of the World magazine, shown below, where it said the terrific war outbreak in Europe has fulfilled an extraordinary prophecy. So I have the Proclaimer's book, and on page 60, at the bottom, yes, they do correctly quote that article. But the governing body must know, or they certainly should know, that that magazine was mistaken. Russell had not prophesied the beginning of a war in Europe in 1914. In fact, on page 226 of the July 15th, 1894 Watchtower, he predicted the exact opposite. And that's the one I quoted earlier. Bear in mind that the end of 1914 is not the date for the beginning, but the end of the time of trouble. So when it has the title, End of All Kingdoms in 1914, they even had to change that, because by time September, in the St. Louis Dispatch, when the article was reprinted, they changed the title of it to Pastor Russell's prophecy 25 years ago. So can you see? They even had to change the title of this article. So going back to the Proclaimer's book, on page 560, Captives of Concepts on page 88 mentions this clip right here. Paper's falling all over the place. He mentions this clip right here in the Proclaimer's book. It says, this clipping appears on page 560 of the Proclaimer's book. It was originally written during World War I. It states that for over 40 years, Russell had taught that the present World War would commence in 1914. But that's not true. When you read this clip, the fine print underneath, that the present Great World War would commence in 1914, you can see that. And we know that's not true. Russell believed it would be the end, not the beginning of trouble. Now, there's something else here that I wanted to show. Well, got another bond volume here. This is the Watchtower, 1984. April 1st, April Fool's article. On page 5, 1914, a marked year. Why? And they have a picture of that article, and there again, not big enough to actually read. It says, in its August 30th, 1914 issue, the New York newspaper The World drew attention to the remarkable fact that the International Bible Students Association, Jehovah's Witnesses, had pointed to 1914 as a marked date in Bible prophecy. See, so it's kind of misleading, because witnesses would automatically think, oh, well, they mean, that's when Christ would appear invisibly and start ruling and choose them, and that whole thing. Now, many Jehovah's Witnesses do not know about this book. I had never even heard or seen this book until a few years ago, when someone sent me a box of old books and this was in it. Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose. Now, I think this might be a pre-Proclaimer's book. It's from 1959. And there are some gems in here, let me tell you. Now, what's interesting about this book is it's almost like maybe a Bible study, sitting and talking to, an elder. It's like written in conversation form. All these conversations they're having about this. Like I said, there's some gems in here that kind of squeaked by. But on page 54, End of All Kingdoms in 1914. Chapter 9. Tom, when 1914 finally arrived and the First World War began, I suppose Jehovah's Witnesses really came into their own, didn't they? John, not exactly. For the first few months of that year, the religious leaders and others were pouring considerable ridicule upon Russell and the Watchtower Society because in those early months nothing had happened to the Gentile nations as Jehovah's Witnesses had been expecting. Now this is incorrect because it was the Bible students, not Jehovah's Witnesses. Maria, of course this did not stop the witness work because the society was expecting the end in the fall of that year. So see, they admit the Bible students were expecting the end in the fall of that year. By January, they had completed the preparation of the photodrome of creation, and by April had sent out 12 sets to 31 cities. The report showed that over 35,000 every day were seeing, hearing, and admiring this unusual production. John, that's right, but as the year wore on and violence had not yet occurred, in spite of the air of tension throughout Europe, ridicule against the kingdom message mounted. However, a great change took place when nation after nation and kingdom after kingdom began cascading into what is now called the First World War. Now, then they go on to talk about this article. A typical public press reaction appeared in the leading New York newspaper, The World, in this paper's Sunday magazine section, under the arresting headline, End of All Kingdoms in 1914. A long feature article appeared. Here's a portion of that article. And then it quotes some of it. Now over here on page 55, under the subheading, Preaching the Good News Continues, I like how they spin this. And it's like, they will try everything, to spin this to where it doesn't come out and say Russell and the Bible students were false prophets. Lois, it must have been a time of mixed emotions. John, it was, although there were many things taking place that the witnesses themselves did not yet realize. For 40 years prior to 1914, they had been pointing to this date through scriptural developments. Now, as factual evidences began to appear to verify the conclusions they had reached by this Bible study, they were certain that October 1st, 1914, brought a legal end to the 2,520 years of Jehovah's tolerance of the sovereignty assumed by the Gentile nations over the earth. That legally the end of all nations had come in 1914. I love how they try to spin that. Just unbelievable. Now I want to mention another book here by Edmund Gruss, G-R-U-S-S. It is called Jehovah's Witnesses, Their Claims, Doctrinal Changes. And I have just a page here from Google Books. Looks like it was on page 85. What was predicted for 1914? And it mentions this article, End of All Kingdoms. And he says the same thing. With knowledge of Russell's predictions for 1914 and after examining the World Magazine article, Carl Olof Johnson and Wolfgang Hertz conclude, pretending that Russell's predictions came true, the Watchtower Society has often quoted the World Magazine of August 30th, 1914, in an article headed End of All Kingdoms in 1914. In that magazine, it was claimed that the terrific war outbreak in Europe has fulfilled an extraordinary prophecy. Then Pastor Russell's publications are quoted, and this, in a way, that gives a reader the impression that Russell had foreseen the war. In reality, the prediction of Russell quoted in the article referred to the Great Trouble, the Battle of Armageddon, the end of all kingdoms, and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. None of these events was fulfilled in 1914 as Russell had predicted. On the other hand, what did come, the World War, could not be found among Russell's prophecies. So, I'm not sure if this book is still available. I have seen used copies on eBay and Amazon. Like I said, someone sent me, this book in a box of other books, so we appreciate it very much. And keep researching, everybody. Keep researching, because we just keep exposing, Watchtower and their lies and all of this. And a lot of this literature, like the Proclaimer's book and the Watchtower and Awake articles, are still available on jw.org. Okay, so there's a couple of small little nuggets, tidbits I want to cover, since there's so many Jehovah's Witnesses watching YouTube videos now that you may not be aware of. So, going back to the Proclaimer's book, that book that sat on our shelves and we really never read it, never studied it. It was history, didn't really matter much because we thought we knew Watchtower's history. Well, you can find some gems in here. Let's go over to page 576. And it's talking about Watchtower's history. Now, when Watchtower says C.T. Russell was the first president, they are lying about that also. Because when you go over to page 576, you'll see some pictures like this. The second paragraph. The following year, the first of an extensive series of tracts designed to interest people in Bible truths was prepared for publication. This work quickly took on immense proportions. In order to handle it, Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was formed on February 16, 1881. And many of us have those charters. With W.H. Conley as president. So when they started the original Watchtower Tract Society in 1881, Zion's Watchtower Tract Society, W.H. Conley was the president and C.T. Russell was the secretary and treasurer. C.T. Russell wasn't the first president. So, alright, now same book, going over to page 630. They're talking about the testing and sifting from within. Good chapter. The third paragraph down. Falsely, however, some who profess to be Christian brothers charged that the Watchtower had denied that Jesus is the mediator between God and men, that it had repudiated the ransom and denied the necessity and fact of the atonement. None of this was true. Okay, now think about what that is saying for just a minute. These apostates charged the Watchtower that they deny Jesus is the mediator between God and men. You want to hear something of why they may have thought that? Why this accusation came out? Because if you go to the 1910 Watchtower, page 198, 199, it's talking about mediator and their covenant relationship. Now remember, the Bible students all believed they were the anointed, the chosen, the saints, the sons of God, and in that covenant relationship. I'm going to read therefore what it says. Wherefore we are no longer aliens but sons, Not only does no mediator stand between us and God, but no mediator brought us to God. The Father himself called us and drew us, as the scriptures declare, and himself pointed us to Jesus, our advocate. We call attention to the fact that an advocate stands alongside of as a spokesman and does not come between as does the mediator. We also drew attention to the fact that Jesus was not spoken of as our mediator, but we are told that he is our advocate with the Father. What about the scripture about Jesus being the mediator between God and men? Don't they remember that scripture? So can you see why maybe some who they considered apostates, opposers, false brothers, were charging Watchtower with this? Well, if I read that back then, that's what I would have understood it to say. Is this true? What about today? Is it true today? Is Jesus the mediator between all servants of Jehovah and their God Jehovah? Is Jesus your mediator? Going back to the Watchtower, 1989, August 15th, page 30. Questions from readers. Is Jesus the mediator only for Spirit-anointed Christians or for all mankind? Since 1 Timothy 2, 5 and 6 speaks of him as the mediator who gave himself a corresponding ransom for all. You guys are going to love their explanation. The Bible contains both basic teachings and deep truths, which are solid food for study. One such study involves Jesus Christ's role as mediator. The Apostle Paul wrote, "There is one God and one mediator between God and men, a man, Christ, Jesus, who gave himself a corresponding ransom for all." This is what is to be witnessed to at its own particular times. To grasp what Paul is saying, we must first appreciate that the Bible sets out two destinies for faithful humans. Here we go. I'm going to skip down to the bottom of the first column. And then they quote Galatians 3, 19 and 20. It was transmitted through angels by the hand of a mediator. Talking about God's law given to Israel. So there was a mediator. It was Moses. Going on. That mediator was Moses. He was the intermediary agent between Jehovah and the fleshly nation of Israel. An agent for what? For establishing a covenant or legal contract between God and the nation. Skipping down the middle column, first full paragraph, towards the end. The new covenant was legally established. It laid the basis for some of Christ's followers, beginning with the apostles, to gain entry into the holy place, heaven itself. Okay, so it's talking about the new covenant. Jesus was the mediator between the new covenant and Jehovah. Going over to the third column. My battery's going dead, so I gotta hurry and cut this short. Clearly then, the new covenant is not a loose arrangement open to all mankind. But that's what the Bible says. That Jesus is the mediator between God the Father and man. So they're going beyond what is written. Where does it say it only applies to those in the new covenant? Oy vey. This should help us to understand 1 Timothy 2, 5 and 6. Here the reference to mediator was made after the 5 other occurrences of the word in letters written earlier. Hence Timothy would have understood Jesus' mediatorship to be his legal role connected with the new covenant. Oy vey. Going over to page 31. The bottom of the first column. The people of all nations who have the hope of everlasting life on earth benefit even now from Jesus' services. though he is not their legal mediator, for they are not in the new covenant. He is their means of approaching Jehovah. Middle section, first full paragraph. Consequently, 1 Timothy 2, 5, and 6 is not using mediator in the broad sense common in many languages. It is not saying that Jesus is a mediator between God and all mankind. Rather, it refers to Christ as legal mediator of the new covenant. This being the restricted way in which the Bible uses the term. Jesus is also a corresponding ransom for all in that covenant, both Jews and Gentiles, who will receive immortal life in heaven. And there's many more. The little gray book, The Prince of Peace. I believe it is page 16. Says the same thing. Jesus is not the mediator between all mankind. Like Moses, he is only the mediator between the 144,000, the anointed, and God. And it's sad because Jehovah's Witnesses, I've talked to many of them, and they actually believe that Jesus is their mediator. So can you see why some back in the early days, the Bible students, believe, they were charging Watchtower that they were not, Jesus was not their mediator. I can see why that would happen. And then they say this is not true. In the Proclaimer's book, this is not true. I just read right from their own literature. Yes, it is true. It's true. Proclaimer's book, these articles, they're still available on jw.org. Look up mediator. Even in the Insight book, years ago, I had talked to some JWs that showed up here, and I showed them right from their own Insight book where it says that he is only a mediator between the 144,000. And they said, oh, well, that was back then. Like at Pentecost, 33. Ay. It's sad. It's sad that some don't even know their own history. I would love the chance to talk to my mom now. Boy, could I Einstein her a little bit. That's a term of enlighten them, give them an education. Because we know so much more than we did even 8 years ago. My goodness. And I am just tickled pink to see that so many Jehovah's Witnesses are using this time where they're not so busy going out in service and going to meetings now, that are doing research and watching YouTube videos. I love it. And I want to thank the person who sent me an email of a copy from an elder. And I'm not going to mention any names because I wouldn't want to out him. But he feels that tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses are researching now their history. They're looking this stuff up themselves. They're not afraid to do research, and they're watching YouTube videos. I love it. We just got the Canada service report. I didn't even see in there where they're bragging about their baptisms or their publisher increase or anything like that. The only thing in there I noticed was their pioneers for August. What's wrong, Watchtower? You losing control? You losing your numbers? Be honest. Be honest with your numbers. We want to see how many really are indoctrinated Jehovah's Witnesses. Because I know a lot of PMOs. There's a lot of PMOs that are still being counted. I would guess at least half of the numbers are actually PMOs. And especially when you get emails from elders who are saying they think tens of thousands are doing research now and watching YouTube videos. Love it. So all of you YouTubers and bloggers and activists, you know, posting on all these forums and stuff, keep up the great work. Keep it up. Keep it up. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And I'm sorry I was kind of all over the place, but with there being so much information here, and I could be here for another week because there's so many articles where Watchtower talks about this 1914 article. And they cleverly edit out, cherry pick, you know, what Russell was actually saying. So, love it. And if you can find this book, this 1959 Jehovah's Witnesses and the Divine Purpose, it's a good one. It's a good one. I know the PDF is out there. So thank you everyone for watching, and like I said, thank you for your love and support, and you all have a wonderful weekend. We love you. Bye.